Welcome to an exciting tutorial on Poser 11 and Poser Pro 11. From Renderosity, I am Mark Bremer, and thank you for joining us for this tutorial right here. We will specifically be looking at working with the SuperFly render engine as it relates to working with people in this movie. We're going to compare it to FireFly and talk about the new capabilities, how you work with it, and why you would work with it. Really important thing here. This is an advanced tutorial on working with Poser. If you're new to the program, please check out the many free tutorials right here at Renderosity on how to work with Poser. The core function of the program and where you find things, the interface, it hasn't changed. And if you're wanting to know where tools are and why you use them, please check out those tutorials because I don't cover that stuff right here. We're looking at kind of these high-end features and additions and what it means for people that are already familiar working with Poser. So with that said, let's take a look at what's on screen right here. This is one of the new characters, Paul, and he has textures built that capitalizes on the new capabilities of working with SuperFly. It's pretty good. This is the, well, it's got some nice tonality, great detail and reflectivity that's going on, but check this out. Look at his eyes and look at the corners of his mouth right here. Let me drag this across and we'll see the new SuperFly render, and there's really no comparison. The teeth in FireFly, unless you really crank up some of the render settings, they self-illuminate and we get some more realistic interactions here. Look at the spectral highlights in the eyes. I mean, just awesome. And obviously, the luminosity of the skin, the subsurface scattering, has been significantly increased. So this movie isn't about render settings, but let's pop in here and look at these real quick. The pixel samples is something you'll probably want to start adjusting after a little while before you go to final render. Understand that as you increase pixel samples, it's going to take a little longer to render. Just know that. And we'll cover some of these other options, especially dealing with volumetrics later on in some other movies coming up. So let me cancel out of this. And the reason I wanted to bring up pixel samples, set at 3. Let me cancel. You'll notice underneath the character's jaw right here, it looks a little grainy. That's because it's only working with 3 pixel samples. To increase this fidelity so that we get a smoother tonality, and you can actually see the character's skin looks just a little more grainy, you can increase the pixel samples and make that go away. So just know that going into it. So let's hop into the preview room right here before we get started in materials and working with the SuperFly engine. And again, in the render room, you designate which render engine you're working with right there at the pull down menu. In preview, not a big change here. The character presents like you would expect it to, and this is actually a problem when you're working with the SuperFly render engine because most of the features that manifest out of that are ray traced, and this isn't a ray trace preview, so you don't see everything. Let's hop into the materials room here real quick. And we are set with eyelashes here, so let me just switch over to the character's head. And it takes a second and brings that in. Now, before we get started in changing these various nodes and talking about some of the new features that get plugged in here, this again is the standard stock preview. This will not show you all the changes that get made inside of the room when you're working with it. It just doesn't. So the smartest thing to do is to come to Window and enable the Ray Trace Preview. Now this it does these funny little multicolored items right here, and I've got mine set to auto refresh, so as I make changes, most of the time it will auto update, but it doesn't do it always. And maybe this is something that'll get worked out in the programs that's around with another dot update that might come to the program. So know that sometimes you'll see me clicking refresh even though I've got auto refresh on to force the program to see what I'm updating over here in the materials area. So we've got image maps. Let me close this up a little bit, kind of the usual nodes to get plugged in here. The biggest difference is that we've got the Poser root surface, the basic root node. There's a checkbox for FireFly and SuperFly root. Here is one of the cool things. The program allows you to build textures that are backwards compatible. So if you want to go into older textures and ramp up those textures so it renders better in Poser 11, you can do that. and you can use some of the SuperFly capabilities, no problem. The nice thing is, if you happen to be a merchant that builds these things to sell, that they gracefully go backwards to older characters. So, yeah, you can't get all the punch that you get with SuperFly, but it doesn't render the texture or material useless to older characters. The nice thing is also is that the older characters that get imported into Poser 11, the program does a pretty good job of converting some of those older texture nodes. So here's the biggest difference of working with the new Poser capabilities. It is layered rendering. If you are familiar with Photoshop or CorelDRAW or something like that, that allows you to build in layers so you can have overlapping things, that's exactly what Poser does now. We'll be pulling off some tricks. We're turning our character Paul maybe into a boxer. We're going to add sweat to him. We're going to get some blood coming out of his nose and mouth. We're going to give him a nice tattoo on his head, the kind of stuff that keeps you from getting a job, you know? And we can do that with layers in a very non-destructive fashion and turn things on and off if we want. So it's just awesome. Another little nice capability here is that, I'm sorry, the new preview they've got of the head makes me laugh a little bit because the eyes are kind of blunked out. It's not a true preview, but when you're working with skin, it gives you a pretty good idea of what you're working with, much better than that little odd colored hump that had been down here for years and years. So I'll just turn that off because actually it's nightmare material. Anyhow, let's go with the first step of adding sweat to our character. Now the way I do this is by using masks. We're going to add a new layer. I'll just click the plus button here and a new layer comes in and our character looks like he is in the Blue Man group all of a sudden. This is important because how you control these effects is with masking. Well, what is masking? If you haven't had the need to, you might be a poser wizard and still not have worked with custom-made masks. Now, you can create masks with many of the tools that come with Poser, especially mathematical ones and programmatic ones. But I made some custom ones here, and let me show you what I mean when I pop into Poser. This is Paul's head texture map. I copied it out of the folder that comes with it, and I built my own Photoshop file to work with it. I also have some of the diffuse layers that take place. The bumps in the new Poser characters are all done with normal maps, a superior way to bring a high level of detail into the characters. And there's actually some tutorials talking about how and why you do that and make that work, so just know that. But what we are doing with masks is that I gave myself a little bit of a black background here, and let's say we're adding sweat. I went ahead and let me zoom in just a little bit on this. Yeah, added some little sweat rivulets coming down, and this happens to be the mask for the layer. If I turn on just the sweat, not quite so pronounced, so it's a little more believable here. So I just added that. And then I'm showing you these things so that as we start using them, it'll make sense. I've got, let me back out just a little bit. I've got my bad boy tribal tat that we're going to be using. And the tattoo's not going to be white. What it is that if I turn off this color layer here, which is there for my positioning benefit, whatever is white shows through. So what was blue on the Poser character, if we pop over there, if I use this mask on this character with a diffuse color of blue, his tattoo will look blue in that location because it's showing through. And you'll also notice this isn't a bright white. That's because I want some of that skin color to actually come through and add a level of reality to it. So the last thing I'll be doing here is adding actually some subsurface scattering for the ears. And oh, we've got some blood we're going to be adding. So as I turn off the tribal tattoo, wherever there is white and I've got the ear subsurface, we'll turn that off. I actually have a movie specifically dealing with that in an earlier version, so check that out. And then we'll be adding some blood. Blood doesn't need to be red because I'm going to use the Poser tools to make red blood. But what I needed to do was to create this mask so that I can control or contain the effect just to this white area. All right, we hop back in here. I will add a new node here. A couple things about the nodes. When we create new ones, there are new root nodes. So the Poser surface is the root node we've got here. We'll be dealing with physical surfaces in upcoming movies, and then there are cycles surfaces. When we start working with cycles, you can bring in some specific nodes for that, but you don't have to use these things to get the benefits of working with SuperFly. They're here. We will be covering them in some upcoming movies. But for all the nodes I'm adding right here, we're going to be using the stock nodes. So let me bring in a 2D texture. Image map. This is going to be our sweat mask. So let me click the image source. We'll browse to that file. And I saved various versions out of that Photoshop file we were looking at into JPEG files. And it must be waking up all my disk drives. Anyhow, when it gets to this, we'll go ahead and take a look at it. Spinning beach balls. You don't even want to know how much of my life has been spent watching spinning beach balls. There we go. So let's go to the sweat mask JPEG, mostly black with the white. I'll choose open and OK. Now we get an automatic redraw there, and it still doesn't look quite right, does it? Well, we need to plug in the mask to the transparency channel. Now this does not make the character's head transparency. This transparency is only for the effect. So as I bring this in, and I give it a value of 1, so it's at 100%, and click off that, you'll notice that, yeah, it's updated here a little bit, and we're starting to see a little streaking on the character's face. His face also got really, really shiny, and that has to do with the specularity. When you work with the masks, you'll want to bring in diffuse colors and things like that into the alternate diffuse and specular channels, utilizing the mask area. So what I'm going to do is simply say specular value. Let's turn this down to 0. I'll click here. We'll see our automatic update go on, and suddenly this guy doesn't have the sweaty sheen that he had before, which was too much. We want to keep some of that diffuse quality around the eyebrows in here, and that's how we do that. Also, if we want to change this color right here, the diffuse color, to white, we can do that, and this will accentuate the sweat just a little bit. We're starting to see some in the little rivulet that comes down right here, and maybe a little bit right under the eyes here. But this is where we can go ahead and take this masking channel and actually just plug it in here to, let's go with alternate diffuse and maybe even alternate specular. All right, we pop that in, and it's updating now, and we are starting to see, yeah, this is we're getting some nice specular highlights. That may actually be a little too much. So if we want, we can click on the specular color here, and let me just, with the mouse still clicked down, go over here and sample one of the lighter skin tones out of here and release. Yeah, this will update here and knock that down just a little bit. If we want, we can add a little reflection to that, but we're going to bring in another image map right here, because what I want to do is make the sweat stand out on his skin just a little bit. So let me close this map up. Because these functions are now being confined to this mask right here, we'll collapse that. I'll bring in a new texture map. This is going to be one that I created that actually is just a kind of faded out version of the sweat mask. So let me browse over to that, and we'll just grab sweat. And this is much dimmer. In fact, let's see if I zoom in, we can see here just a little bit. Yeah, very little types of detail there. So I'll click open, and I'm going to use this in the displacement channel. Now the character already has displacement on it. Yeah. So we are simply going to add some additional displacement, and I'll plug that in. This amount right here is a little too much. Now this is one of the cases here. We'll see if it actually updates in the ray trace preview. I don't think it will. No, it doesn't look like it. This value here, 0.08, you might think is really small. It's not. It's pretty significant actually. And if I click refresh manually and force the program to go sample all the nodes and all the changes here, sometimes these come like sticking way out of the head just a little bit here. And yeah, we're getting too much in here. Don't want a lot. Let me bring it back to 0.01 and click that. Don't want this guy to have icicles on his face, right? So now that we've got that set in here, and we'll let it finish rendering, we may come in and adjust that. But let's move on to some of these other items that we can add. So on this layer, we've added different specularity. We've added displacement. We have added a different diffuse color. If we want to bring down this diffuse so it's not quite so bright, we can again click and kind of sample into you know, the character preview windows here. Something a little more lighter skin tone. Bright white just is a little too bright. Okay, let's add a new layer. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and say, all right, we'll click on the plus button up here. Character turns blue again. I want to add some blood to the character right here. I don't want this sheen over everything again, so we'll have to do the same thing we did. I'll knock down the specular value to 0, and I'll bring in a new texture map, and this is going to be the mask that goes with the blood for the corners of the mouth. So I'll browse over to that. We'll track down blood JPEG, bring that in, and then we'll wire this into the transparency channel and give it a value of 1. So the mask is functioning at 100%. Now that that's in there, he's bleeding blue. So you can see that I can start controlling some of these colors now with the regular interface, just using the mask to isolate it to one instance on the character's face. So what do we want to do here? We want a darker red. Let's just click down here and give it kind of a nice dark rich red. So that'll update here and change, and then we can say, okay, let's plug some of this in maybe to an alternate specular. Let's go with a lighter red, not a white maybe. White would be too bright. And that's, yeah, that's a little too bright right there. Let's unplug that. We may not actually want to do that. Yeah, we'll see. Part of it's just playing with it. Alternate diffuse, I don't know if I want to deal with that. Let's plug this in and just see. Let's just see. Got white. We'll kind of see. The preview goes real white. Let me darken this up just a little. So you get to start layering some of these different items in there, and that is still looking maybe a little too luminous. So we can always disconnect that. And this is the nice way you can start working with this with layers. You're not locked in to working with a painted image that goes on there. And it's just, it's a pretty nice flexible way to work. If I want to go ahead and maybe give it a little dimension to that, let me go ahead and bring this into the displacement channel. And I'm going to just change this to 0.01. I've seen to have had better luck with some really low values like that. The specularity for this, if we want to bring that up just a little bit, let's see how it works. I don't know. Don't know what we'll do right there. Yeah, we'll leave it like that for now. Let's add another layer and get this guy tatted up so he looks like the bad boy he is. We'll click the plus button in the window. Again, he turns blue. We'll leave it blue for now, and we'll bring in one more time this image map texture, or an image map texture. Browse over to that, and head tribal tat. And again, this one has a little bit of gray in here, so it's not a bright white, which means that whatever effect we apply to this is not going to be appearing at 100% over here. And that's because I want the head texture to be able to show through there. So we bring that in, and we bring this down to transparency, and again, give this a value of 1. Now, you might say, well, can't you just bring in a black and white texture and then change the transparency? What it does is it changes it all over the skin, and I don't know that we really want to do that because everything would have this faint tint of the diffuse color. So you know what bad tattoos look like. They kind of have that really dark blue-green. There's great good tattoos, and there's horrible bad tattoos. I'm sure you've seen them. So let's bring this down to something like this, and maybe give it, I think it needs to be a little more green than that, don't you? We'll see what the preview looks like. I'm going to leave it like that. This diffuse type of sheen that we've got going on, don't want it. So we're going to dial this down to 0 like we've done before. Now, any value that is in here that is 0 or non-existent is going to be overwritten by the nodes further down the line. So looking at the layers, you've got the base node. If there's no value in any of these areas that we have right here, then the base node takes over and applies whatever value's in there. which means that the skin bump and stuff like that, or any type of displacement we've got going on, is not overridden by what we're doing here at layer 3. The last thing is, and maybe what I want to do is actually change some of these lights so we can get a little bit better light on the subject here, and yeah, light him up a little bit more. Yeah, I like the look of that. Let's go ahead and increase the luminosity of his ears just a little bit. I need to reselect Paul since I moved a light, and reselect head. Let's add another layer. And this time we'll bring in the mask that has to do with creating a little more kind of the reddish type of subsurface scattering that we would get on the ears with light coming through that. So I click here, ear subsurface scattering, and choose OK. Starts to redraw just a little bit, and like we've done before, let's confine this by plugging it into the transparency channel, value 1. And we may want to say, you know what, blue ears aren't for me, so we're going to go ahead and reduce the influence of that down to 0. And it's gone black. Let's do this. Always have fun working with this. Let's go ahead and pop over here to base. I'm going to take this image map that is the head and copy it. Come back to this last layer we're working on and paste it. And plug it into diffuse color. So we get a good matchup there so that the skin should match that A-OK. And whoops, let me give that a value of 1 again. And let me turn that to white so that the color of his ears is not tinted. That's what the blue's doing. So that's looking more like it should. The specular value here we're going to bring down to 0. And now what we want to do is under alternate diffuse, we want to go ahead and plug in this mask down here too. Actually, I think what we want to do is create a new node. Let's go to lighting. And special subsurface skin. All right. So now what I'm going to do is, with that plugged in right there, is plug this into our alternate diffuse here. And this is where the subsurface scattering is plugged in. We see his ears start to light up white there. Don't want that necessarily. I'm going to click and drag and sample out of this texture map right here to give ourselves a little bit of a red. And this is just a little more believable interaction of how light would work with something as thin as the ears. Now, if we had a scene where I went ahead and moved the light behind the character, I could go ahead and turn this to more of a red. So it would look like, well, the normal type of redness that you see from behind the ears. If I happen to bring this back behind our character, we'll see our scene update here real quickly. That's still looking pretty good. I like that. But if we want to add a little red to it, let's come back down to Paul, head, layer 4, since that's just where we added it. And let's make this maybe a little more red. So we've got this backlight, this rim light taking place here, and we can see it update now with it. And yeah, we're getting some nice type of glowing effects for the ears. So we've been working kind of in a small space right here. Let's come back to the pose room and let's just render this thing out. We'll go ahead and let it go to a full render here so we can see everything that's going on. So here are the takeaways from this series right here as we're looking at it. The options that you've got to work with now for textures come in layers, so you can add multiple different masks to layers, whether you create them inside a poser or bring in a pixel-based map like we have, and then begin applying them and using the standard nodal materials editor to go ahead and change color and any of the values and some of those other complex functions. The sweat on our character is very bright. In fact, if you ask me, it's a little too bright right now. Exaggeration for the sake of clarity, right? But we can simply go back in and dial this down. Really easy to do that and make it not so bright. So I can knock down the diffuse color. I could also add in a reflection color to this. So if we had a total environment, the sweat would pick up some of the reflectivity of the scene around it. But the nice thing is, here we are, we're coming up, we're kind of reinventing how our character looks without altering a base texture, without having to go through so many hoops that you used to have to go through with the previous version of Poser and complex node structures, when we can just create really simple nodes on individual layers and apply them to the character.